George Washington is usually presented in schools as a flawless national hero, the first president of the United States, the victorious general of the American Revolutionary War, and the father of his country. While these titles are historically accurate, they often hide the complex and sometimes uncomfortable truths about his life and character. One lesser-taught fact is that Washington was not born into greatness or wealth comparable to other founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson. His early life was marked by insecurity, ambition, and social anxiety. Washington lacked a formal education and never attended college, something that deeply bothered him throughout his life. He compensated for this by carefully crafting his image, manners, and reputation. He was extremely conscious of how others perceived him and kept detailed notes on social behavior, dress, and etiquette. Another rarely emphasized fact is that Washington initially wanted to serve the British Empire, not rebel against it. As a young man, he fought for Britain during the French and Indian War and hoped to gain a commission in the British Army. When the British denied him advancement largely because he was colonial-born, it planted seeds of resentment. Schools often simplify his revolutionary motives as purely ideological, but personal ambition, pride, and frustration also played major roles in shaping his path toward leadership in the American Revolution. Another uncomfortable truth schools often gloss over is George Washington's deep involvement in slavery. Washington enslaved over 300 people during his lifetime, making him one of the largest slaveholders among the founding fathers. While textbooks sometimes praise him for freeing his slaves in his will, they rarely explain how complex and contradictory his relationship with slavery truly was. Washington relied heavily on enslaved labor to maintain his plantation at Mount Vernon and lived an elite lifestyle supported by their forced work. He frequently complained about the economic inefficiency of slavery, but these concerns were more practical than moral in his early years. He pursued runaway enslaved people aggressively, even sending agents to track them down across state lines. One famous case involved Ona Judge, an enslaved woman who escaped to New Hampshire. Washington spent years trying to recapture her. Although he privately expressed doubts about slavery later in life, he never publicly condemned the institution. Schools often present Washington as morally ahead of his time, but in reality, he benefited from and protected a system that denied basic human rights to hundreds of people. This contradiction is essential to understanding him as a real historical figure rather than a myth. George Washington's military leadership is also more complicated than school lessons suggest. While he is remembered as a brilliant general, he actually lost more battles than he won. His true strength was not tactical genius but persistence, adaptability, and political awareness. Washington understood that he did not need to defeat the British Army outright. He only needed to survive long enough to keep the revolution alive.
T-10.
He often avoided direct
8,
confrontation,
7,
retreated strategically,
6,
and relied heavily
5,
on foreign assistance,
4,
especially
3,
from France.
2,
The victory
1.
at Yorktown, often credited solely to Washington,
Liftoff of Ares 1X.
naval power,
Testing
and financial
concepts
support.
for the
Another
future
rarely taught
of
fact is
new
that
rocket
Washington faced
design.
serious criticism and opposition from within his own ranks. Many officers doubted his competence, and some members of Congress even considered replacing him. Conway Cabal, an internal movement against Washington, exposed how fragile his position really was. Schools often portray him as universally admired, but in reality, his authority had to be constantly defended and negotiated. His greatness lay not in perfection, but in his ability to endure failure, manage egos, and hold together a fragile revolutionary movement. As president, George Washington is often praised for setting democratic traditions, but schools rarely discuss how uncertain and experimental his leadership actually was. The U.S. Constitution was untested, political parties were emerging, and the nation was deeply divided. Washington feared political parties, believing they would destroy national unity, yet his own cabinet, particularly Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, formed the foundations of America's first party system. He approved policies that strengthened federal power, such as the creation of a national bank and the suppression of the Whiskey Rebellion using military force against American citizens. These actions contradict the simple image of Washington as a gentle guardian of liberty. Additionally, Washington carefully managed his legacy, understanding the power of symbolism. His decision to step down after 2 terms was not just an act of humility, but a calculated move to prevent political chaos and preserve his reputation. Schools tend to teach Washington as a marble statue, calm, wise, and flawless, but the truth is far more human. He was ambitious, deeply flawed, sometimes contradictory, and constantly learning. Understanding these lesser-taught facts does not diminish George Washington. Instead, it makes his achievements more meaningful by showing how extraordinary leadership can emerge from imperfection.